The cruelest invitations are the ones wrapped in a smile. The ballroom of the Grand Crescent Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people earned in a year. Golden light spilled across polished marble floors while a string quartet played softly near the stage, their music blending with laughter, champagne glasses, and the steady hum of wealth celebrating itself. Every table was dressed in white roses and silver accents. Every guest looked as though they had stepped out of a magazine spread designed to impress strangers. At the center of it all stood Ryan Whitaker. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly. His smile appeared effortless. One hand rested casually in his pocket while the other accepted congratulations from investors, business partners, and lifelong friends who had gathered to witness what many called the beginning of his perfect new chapter. Ryan enjoyed every second of it. He enjoyed the attention. He enjoyed the admiration. Most of all, he enjoyed knowing there was one guest still missing. Across the room, a few people glanced toward the entrance every few minutes. Not because they expected someone important. Quite the opposite. They were waiting for a spectacle. Waiting for a woman many believed had become a cautionary tale. Ryan had made sure the invitation reached her personally. He had even paid extra to locate the shelter where she was reportedly staying. The story had circulated quietly among old friends for years. Vanessa Brooks. His ex-wife. The woman who had once stood beside him before disappearing from the world that now celebrated him. Some claimed she had lost everything after the divorce. Others whispered she drifted from place to place without a permanent address. Nobody seemed to know the truth anymore. But everyone knew enough to pity her. Or judge her. Or both. Ryan lifted a champagne glass as another guest approached. You really invited her, the man asked with a grin. Ryan shrugged. Why not? Everyone deserves closure. Laughter followed. Light. Casual. Comfortable. The kind of laughter people share when they believe they are standing on the winning side of history. Ryan smiled along with them. Yet. Every few moments his eyes drifted back toward the ballroom entrance. Waiting. Expecting. Anticipating the moment he had imagined for months. Outside, evening rain tapped softly against the hotel windows. Black luxury cars arrived one after another beneath the covered entrance while attendants hurried through the glow of decorative lights. Inside, the celebration continued. The bride was upstairs preparing. Photographers adjusted equipment. Servers carried silver trays through the crowd. Everything moved according to schedule. Everything except the one thing Ryan wanted most. Then the large ballroom doors opened. The sound barely registered at first. A subtle shift. A slight pause in nearby conversations. A few heads turned. Then more followed. Ryan slowly lowered his glass. Across the room, framed by the warm glow spilling from the hallway beyond, a solitary figure stood motionless for a brief moment before stepping forward. Rainwater glistened faintly on a worn dark coat. The room grew quieter. Not silent. Just quieter enough for curiosity to spread. Ryan stared toward the entrance. The smile never left his face. But something about the look in his eyes revealed this was the moment he had truly been waiting for. Vanessa Brooks had arrived. Vanessa took another step into the ballroom, and the contrast was impossible to ignore. Around her, polished shoes moved across marble floors that reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. Designer gowns shimmered beneath golden light. Expensive watches flashed as guests lifted champagne glasses and exchanged smiles. Yet standing among them was a woman wearing a weathered coat still marked by the rain outside. The silence spread slowly, like a ripple moving across water. Some guests lowered their voices. Others stared openly. A few recognized her immediately. Time had changed her appearance, but not enough to erase memory. Ryan watched from across the room as conversations began to shift around her. He could almost hear the whispers forming before the words arrived. Vanessa Brooks. The ex-wife. The woman people stopped talking about years ago because her story had become uncomfortable. One guest leaned toward another and quietly asked if the rumors were true. Another claimed he had heard she spent months moving between shelters. Someone else insisted they had seen her collecting donated groceries from a community center on the south side of the city. No one actually knew. They only repeated fragments. Pieces of stories passed from one person to another until assumptions became accepted truth. Vanessa seemed completely unaware of the attention. Or perhaps she simply refused to react to it. Heras moved calmly across the ballroom. Not searching. Not admiring. Just observing. A server approached carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes, hesitated briefly, then offered one to her. Vanessa thanked him with a small nod and accepted a glass. The simple gesture surprised him. Her voice was steady. Polite. Confident. Not the voice people expected from someone they believed had lost everything. Across the room, Ryan's smile widened. This was exactly how he imagined it. Every stare. Every whisper. Every uncomfortable glance. Years earlier, Vanessa had walked through rooms like this as his wife. She had attended charity galas, business dinners, and fundraising events. People used to greet her by name. Tonight, many looked at her as though she had wandered into the wrong building. The irony pleased him. Near the dance floor, two women exchanged sympathetic looks. One shook her head slowly. "It is sad," she whispered. "No matter what happened between them." The other nodded. I almost did not recognize her. Vanessa continued forward until she reached an empty seat near the back of the ballroom. Not one of the premium tables near the stage. Not among the investors, executives, or family members. A forgotten seat near a decorative column where she could easily disappear from view. She sat down quietly and folded her hands in her lap. The orchestra resumed playing. Conversations gradually returned. Laughter cautiously reappeared. Yet every few minutes, eyes drifted back toward Vanessa. Waiting. Judging. Wondering. Meanwhile, Ryan lifted his glass once more and glanced toward the stage where the evening's speeches would soon begin. Everything was unfolding according to plan. What he did not realize was that Vanessa seemed far too calm for someone supposedly walking into the most humiliating night of her life. The first speech of the evening began 20 minutes later. Guests settled into their seats as soft music faded into the background. The bride and groom stood near the center of the ballroom beneath a canopy of white roses and suspended crystal lights. Applause rolled through the room. Smiles returned. Cameras flashed. For a moment, the attention shifted away from Vanessa. Then Ryan took the microphone. The room responded immediately. He had always been comfortable in front of an audience. His voice carried easily across the ballroom, confident and polished from years of presentations, interviews, and public appearances. He thanked family members. He thanked business partners. He praised his bride. Laughter followed several carefully rehearsed jokes. Everything felt smooth. Predictable. Controlled. Vanessa remained seated near the back, her champagne glass untouched on the table beside her. She listened quietly while the ballroom celebrated around her. Then Ryan glanced in her direction. It happened so quickly that some people almost missed it. A brief look. A slight smile. A pause just long enough to signal a change. Life is funny, he said. Sometimes you look around a room and realize how many people helped shape your journey. A few guests nodded. Others smiled politely. Ryan slowly turned toward the crowd. And sometimes you realize how fortunate you are to leave certain chapters behind. Several people laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Vanessa did not move. Ryan continued speaking. We all make mistakes. We all trust the wrong people at some point. More laughter followed. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew exactly who he meant. Raijan never mentioned Vanessa by name, but he did not need to. The entire room understood. Across the ballroom, eyes drifted toward her again. Waiting for a reaction. Waiting for embarrassment. Waiting for anger. Vanessa offered none of them what they wanted. She simply sat there, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The chandeliers above reflected warm light across her face, revealing nothing except quiet composure. Raijan seemed almost disappointed by her silence. It continued. The good news is that life eventually puts everyone exactly where they belong. This time the laughter was stronger. Several guests exchanged knowing glances. Someone at a nearby table shook his head and smiled. Raijan raised his glass. To new beginnings. The room erupted into applause. Crystal glasses lifted into the air. Servers moved between tables refilling champagne. Music resumed. Yet beneath the celebration, something felt different. Vanessa remained perfectly still. Not humiliated. Not defensive. Not broken. The reaction Ryan expected never arrived. In fact, the more he spoke, the calmer she appeared. Near the stage, one of the photographers lowered his camera and glanced toward her. Something about her expression seemed strangely out of place. Most people would have left by now. Most people would have hidden. Vanessa did neither. She remained seated through every whisper, every stare, every carefully disguised insult. Almost as if she knew something the rest of the room did not. Raijan returned the microphone to the master of ceremonies and accepted congratulations from guests standing nearby. He believed the evening was unfolding exactly as planned. What he could not see was that several times during the speech, Vanessa had quietly checked the elegant silver watch hidden beneath the sleeve of her worn coat. Not nervously. Not anxiously. Simply checking the time. As though she was waiting for someone. The ballroom continued glowing with celebration, but Vanessa's attention had drifted somewhere far beyond the chandeliers, the music, and the whispers circling the room. As another round of applause rose near the dance floor, her mind returned to a very different night years earlier. There had been no crystal lights then. No champagne. No smiling guests. Only the cold glow of a parking lot lamp reflecting off the windshield of an aging sedan. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Rain tapped softly against the roof while Vanessa sat behind the steering wheel wearing a winter coat she had slept in for nearly a week. A folded blanket rested in the back. Sat beside 2 cardboard boxes that contained everything she still owned. The temperature had fallen below 40 degrees that night. She remembered watching her breath fog the glass while cars passed on the highway a few hundred yards away. Nobody looking at those headlights would have guessed a woman was living inside that vehicle. Nobody would have imagined she had once attended corporate fundraisers and charity galas beside one of the city's most admired businessmen. Yet those months became her reality. She learned which grocery stores discarded fresh bread at closing time. She learned which church parking lots remained quiet after midnight. She learned how to stretch $20 across an entire week. More importantly, she learned something nobody could teach inside a ballroom. She learned how much strength exists after pride disappears. During the day she volunteered at community centers. Not because she had spare time. Because those places offered warmth during winter mornings. She organized donated clothing. Sorted canned food. Helped elderly visitors complete paperwork. Sometimes she received a meal in return. Sometimes only a smile. She accepted both with equal gratitude. Months became years. The city moved forward without noticing. New businesses opened. New headlines appeared. Rajan's name occasionally surfaced in local magazines. Vanessa never responded. Never called. Never corrected the stories people told about her. She simply kept moving. One morning she began helping at a public library on the east side of town. The building was old but welcoming. Children filled reading corners after school. Retirees gathered near large windows overlooking a small park. Vanessa arrived every Tuesday and Thursday. Eventually the staff trusted her enough to assist visitors directly. She never spoke much about herself. Most people assumed she was simply another volunteer trying to rebuild her life. In many ways, she was. Yet there was always something unusual about her composure. Even during difficult days, she carried herself with quiet certainty. As though she was following a path visible only to her. Back inside the ballroom, a burst of laughter pulled her back to the present. The orchestra had started another song. Couples drifted toward the dance floor. Nearby guests continued stealing curious glances in her direction. Vanessa checked the silver watch beneath her sleeve once again. 8:47. Her expression remained unchanged. Then, for the first time all evening, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Not because of anything happening inside the ballroom. Because somewhere beyond the hotel entrance, someone was finally arriving. Outside the Grand Crescent Hotel, the rain had softened into a light mist that drifted through the glow of streetlights and reflected across rows of parked luxury vehicles. Inside, the reception continued with practiced elegance. Guests moved between conversations, waiters carried polished silver trays, and the orchestra filled the ballroom with music designed to sound effortless. Yet Vanessa's attention remained fixed on the entrance. 8:53. Her watch marked every passing minute with quiet precision. Years earlier, long before anyone in the city had started whispering about her disappearance, there had been a morning at the Eastbrook Public Library that seemed completely ordinary. Vanessa was shelving donated books near a reading area when a man in a navy overcoat entered carrying a stack of reports under one arm. He looked out of place among the students and retirees filling the building. Not because he appeared wealthy. Because he appeared focused. While others rushed through their day, he seemed to observe everything. His name was Alexander Hayes. At the time, Vanessa did not know that. To her, he was simply another visitor looking for a quiet place to work. Their first conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. A misplaced reference book. A brief thank you. Nothing more. Yet over the following months he returned repeatedly. Sometimes he worked near the windows overlooking the park. Sometimes he sat in silence reading for hours. Occasionally he spoke with Vanessa while she organized donations or helped visitors locate materials. He never asked about her past. Never questioned where she lived. Never treated her as a problem that needed solving. That alone made him different. Most people looked at difficult circumstances and saw a person's limits. Alexander seemed interested only in character. One winter afternoon, a heating problem forced everyone into a smaller section of the library. Vanessa spent hours helping staff relocate equipment and books. By evening she was exhausted. As visitors left, Alexander remained behind. He watched her organize the final cart of materials before quietly asking a question no one had asked in years. How do you stay so calm? Vanessa remembered pausing before answering. Because panic never solved anything. Alexander smiled slightly. That sounds like experience talking. She returned the smile and continued working. Neither of them realized then how important that conversation would eventually become. Back in the ballroom, another round of laughter erupted near the dance floor. Rajan stood surrounded by guests who continued congratulating him on the evening. His confidence seemed larger than ever. The night belonged to him. At least that was what everyone believed. Then the ballroom doors opened once again. This time the reaction was immediate. Several guests near the entrance stopped speaking mid-sentence. A server nearly missed a step. Heads turned one after another across the room. Vanessa looked up from her watch. For the first time all evening, her expression softened. Not with relief. With recognition. Through the entrance walked a tall man in a dark tailored suit, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone completely comfortable in any room he entered. The whispers started instantly. Because nearly everyone in the city knew exactly who Alexander Hayes was. For a few seconds, the atmosphere inside the ballroom changed in a way no one could fully explain. The music continued. Glasses still clinked. Conversations lingered around the edges of the room. Yet the tension shifted toward the entrance as naturally as sunlight moves across a floor. Alexander Hayes walked forward with calm, measured steps, acknowledging a few familiar faces with a polite nod. He did not appear rushed. He did not appear impressed by the luxury surrounding him. If anything, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years inside rooms far more exclusive than this one. Several guests immediately recognized him. A billionaire investor. Founder of one of the largest housing initiatives in the country. A man whose name appeared regularly in financial publications and national news interviews. The whispers spread quickly. Ryan noticed them at once. His smile remained in place, but confusion flickered behind his eyes. Alexander was not on the guest list. At least not the version Ryan had approved. Near the dance floor, a group of executives exchanged surprised looks. One woman nearly dropped her champagne glass. Another guest straightened his jacket before Alexander even approached. It was the kind of reaction influence creates without effort. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained seated near the back of the ballroom. Unlike everyone else, she showed no surprise whatsoever. Her expression remained calm, almost as though she had expected this exact moment down to the minute. Alexander crossed the room, passing tables decorated with white roses and candlelight. Several people attempted to stop him for conversation. He responded politely but continued forward. The closer he moved toward the rear of the ballroom, the quieter the room became. Ryan watched carefully now. The confidence that had carried him through the evening began sharing space with curiosity. Then Alexander reached Vanessa's table. To everyone's surprise, he smiled warmly. Not the polite smile used for strangers. Not the calculated smile used for business. A genuine smile. I hope I am not late, he said. Vanessa glanced at her watch. 3 minutes. Alexander laughed softly. Traffic. The exchange lasted only seconds, but the effect was immediate. Nearby guests stared openly. Ryan's bride looked toward him with a puzzled expression. Nobody understood what they were seeing. How could one of the most influential men in the room be speaking to Vanessa as though they were longtime friends? Alexander pulled out a chair and sat beside her without hesitation. He did not comment on her coat. He did not acknowledge the whispers. He treated her exactly the same way he would treat anyone seated at the front of the ballroom. Across the room, Ryan finally excused himself from a conversation and stepped closer. He wanted answers. So did everyone else. Yet neither Vanessa nor Alexander seemed interested in explaining anything. Instead, they spoke quietly between themselves. Occasionally Vanessa smiled. Occasionally Alexander nodded. The conversation appeared comfortable, familiar, and entirely disconnected from the social hierarchy surrounding them. That detail unsettled people more than anything else. Because influence usually moves toward influence. Wealth gravitates toward wealth. Yet here sat one of the most powerful men in the state beside the woman everyone had spent the evening pitying. And as the minutes passed, a realization slowly began spreading through the ballroom. Perhaps the story people believed about Vanessa Brooks was missing something important. Ryan finally crossed the ballroom. The distance was barely 40 feet, yet it felt much longer beneath the weight of hundreds of curious eyes. Conversations faded as he approached Vanessa and Alexander. The orchestra continued playing, but now even the music seemed quieter. Ryan stopped beside their table and forced a smile. Alexander, he said, extending a hand. This is a surprise. Alexander rose politely and shook it. Good evening, Ryan. Congratulations on the wedding. The exchange appeared cordial, but Ryan could not ignore the fact that Alexander had chosen to spend his first 20 minutes in the ballroom sitting beside Vanessa. I did not know the two of you were acquainted, Ryan said. Alexander glanced briefly toward Vanessa before answering. We have known each other for several years. The response was simple. Yet it immediately created more questions than answers. Ryan laughed lightly. Small world. Vanessa remained silent. Her calmness unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. He had expected discomfort, embarrassment, perhaps even resentment. Instead, she looked completely at ease. Nearby guests pretended not to listen while paying attention to every word. Ryan adjusted his jacket and decided to reclaim control of the moment. Well, he said, raising his voice. Slightly, I am glad everyone could make it tonight. Especially old friends. Several people chuckled. Others shifted awkwardly. The remark landed exactly where he intended. Vanessa simply met his eyes for a moment before looking away. No reaction. No defense. No anger. The absence of emotion felt strangely powerful. Ryan continued smiling, but something inside him had begun to change. The room was no longer responding the way he expected. Earlier, the whispers had centered on Vanessa's appearance. Now they centered on Alexander's presence. More guests were watching the billionaire than the groom. Across the ballroom, several executives had already started searching their phones. One man quietly confirmed Alexander's recent appearance on a national business program. Another mentioned a housing initiative worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The atmosphere was shifting. Ryan could feel it. A few minutes later, the master of ceremonies announced another round of speeches. Guests returned to their seats. Ryan headed toward the stage while Alexander remained beside Vanessa. Before leaving, Ryan glanced back one final time. That was when he noticed something peculiar. Several influential guests had begun approaching their table. Not Vanessa's table. Their table. People who had ignored her all evening suddenly seemed interested in introducing themselves. Investors. Non-profit leaders. Business owners. One by one they stopped to greet Alexander. Yet each conversation included Vanessa. Not as an afterthought. As someone already known and respected. Ryan felt a small knot tighten in his chest. He climbed the stage steps and accepted the microphone, but his concentration was no longer focused on the celebration. It remained fixed on the woman sitting near the back of the ballroom. The woman he believed had arrived as the weakest person in the room. Because for the first time that evening, Ryan found himself asking a question he had never considered before. What if he did not actually know what had happened to Vanessa Brooks after she disappeared from his life? Ryan's next speech did not last long. The confidence remained in his voice, but the room's attention no longer belonged entirely to him. Though many eyes kept drifting toward the table near the back of the ballroom. Though many people were quietly asking the same question. Who exactly was Vanessa Brooks? When the speech ended, polite applause followed. The guests smiled. The music resumed. Yet the energy had changed. Ryan stepped down from the stage and immediately noticed a small crowd beginning to form around Alexander and Vanessa. Not a large crowd. Just enough to attract attention. A city council member stopped to greet them. Then the director of a regional nonprofit. Then a woman who managed one of the state's largest charitable foundations. Each interaction seemed strangely familiar. Not toward Alexander. Toward Vanessa. It is wonderful to see you again, one woman said warmly. The new housing project is changing lives. Vanessa thanked her with a quiet smile. Another guest shook her hand. The Cleveland expansion opened ahead of schedule. Congratulations. Ryan slowed his steps. He could no longer hear every word, but he heard enough. Housing project. Expansion. Congratulations. None of it made sense. The rumors he had heard for years painted a completely different picture. A few feet away, Alexander stood comfortably beside Vanessa, allowing the conversations to unfold naturally. He did not interrupt. He did not explain. He simply watched. Then a journalist attending the wedding approached their table. MS, Brooks, she said. I was hoping to thank you personally. My sister received housing through one of your programs last year. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Several nearby guests immediately turned toward Vanessa. Even Ryan stopped moving. The journalist continued. She never knew you personally funded the pilot initiative. Vanessa's expression remained calm. The program was created to help families, not attract attention. The journalist smiled. That sounds exactly like something you would say. More guests gathered. Curiosity had fully replaced judgment now. Finally, one investor looked directly at Alexander. You never told us the founder was here tonight. Alexander glanced toward Vanessa before answering. It was never my story. Total. The investor blinked. Founder? Alexander nodded. Vanessa established the Housing Forward Network 8 years ago. She built the model that now operates across 14 states. Silence followed. Real silence. Not the awkward silence of embarrassment. The stunned silence that appears when an entire room realizes it has misunderstood someone completely. Housing Forward Network was not a small charity. It was one of the largest housing organizations in the country. Thousands of families had benefited from its programs. Millions of dollars moved through its initiatives every year. Ryan stared across the ballroom. Suddenly the pieces no longer fit the story he believed. The volunteer work. The shelters. The years spent disappearing from public view. Then another truth emerged. Vanessa had never denied spending time in shelters because she had actually lived and worked inside many of them while developing her housing programs. She had chosen to experience the system firsthand. She had walked beside the people she hoped to help. What others interpreted as failure had been purpose. What they called homelessness had been mission. Across the ballroom, Vanessa sat quietly while the truth spread from table to table. No announcement. No dramatic reveal. No victory speech. Just reality finally catching up to assumption. The ballroom remained quiet long after the conversation should have resumed. People continued standing beside their tables, holding untouched champagne glasses while trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the same woman. One version had entered wearing a worn coat beneath the judgment of an entire room. The other now stood revealed through the respect of people whose opinions carried genuine weight. Yet the most remarkable thing about Vanessa was that she behaved exactly the same before and after the truth became known. She did not stand. She did not make a speech. She did not correct anyone. The room had changed. She had not. Ryan felt the difference more than anyone. Only an hour earlier he had watched guests whisper about Vanessa with pity. Now many of those same people were approaching her table with admiration. The shift was impossible to ignore. Across the ballroom, several attendees quietly discussed the impact of Housing Forward Network. Others shared stories about shelters, transitional housing communities, and scholarship programs connected to Vanessa's work. Every conversation seemed to reveal another layer of a life Ryan had never bothered to understand. At one point, the bride gently touched his arm. "Did you know any of this?" she asked. Ryan stared across the room. No, the answer came almost automatically. Because it was true. He did not know. Not really. He had spent years believing he understood Vanessa's story simply because he knew how it began. He never stopped to learn how it continued. Near the back of the ballroom, Alexander stood and offered Vanessa his hand. "Ready?" he asked. Vanessa glanced around the room one final time. The chandeliers still glowed above polished marble floors. The orchestra continued playing. The wedding celebration carried on. Yet something important had changed. Not for her. For everyone else. She accepted Alexander's hand and rose from her chair. Conversation softened as people watched them walk toward the exit. Several guests stepped aside respectfully. Others smiled. A few quietly thanked Vanessa for her work. She acknowledged each person with the same grace she had shown all evening. No resentment. No triumph. Just dignity. As she passed Ryan, their eyes met briefly. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to explain. For the first time all night, Ryan seemed unable to find the right words. Vanessa offered a small, polite smile. Not the smile of someone who had won. The smile of someone who no longer needed to compete. Then she continued walking. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The city shimmered beneath reflections of streetlights and glass towers stretching into the night sky. A black sedan waited near the entrance. Alexander opened the door, but before getting inside, Vanessa paused for a moment and looked back toward the hotel. Through the tall windows she could still see the glow of the ballroom. The music. The movement. The life she once thought she had lost. Yet standing there. Beneath the clear night sky, she realized something simple. She had never lost herself. She had only found a different purpose. Vanessa entered the car, the door closed softly. Moments later, the vehicle disappeared into the city lights. Back inside the ballroom, the celebration continued, but Ryan remained standing where she had left him, surrounded by luxury, applause, and everything he once believed mattered. And for the first time, he understood a truth no invitation could ever control. The strongest revenge was never making someone regret leaving. It was becoming someone extraordinary after they thought your story was over.